Imagine this. The year is 2035, you're checking your bank account on your holographic wristwatch. Yeah, we got those now. And your balance is fine. Great, right? Except the gallon of gas you just bought cost you $25. A dozen eggs? You're looking at $18. You scroll past the news. The US government just spent over $1 trillion this year just paying the interest on its national debt. Not the debt itself, just the interest. Think of that. That's more than the entire defense budget. That's more than Medicaid. It's a black hole sucking the air out of the room. What you're seeing isn't a sci-fi nightmare. It's the inevitable reality of an American economic time bomb. We're not talking about a recession. We're talking about an impending generational catastrophe built on two toxic ingredients: national debt and deficits. Today, we pull back the curtain on the greatest financial slow-motion train wreck in history. We'll explore who built this monster, why no one can stop it, and what happens when the clock finally hits zero. 1. The anatomy of a $30 trillion monster. Debt versus deficit. Alright, let's start with a little financial sex ed, because most people confuse the two terms, and that confusion is exactly what allows the politicians to keep playing their games. We're talking about the national debt and the annual deficit. Think of it this way. The deficit is what you overspent this month. It's the difference between what the US government brought in, mostly taxes, and what it spent in a single fiscal year. If Uncle Sam brought in $4.9 trillion but spent $6.3 trillion, the annual deficit is a spicy little $1.4 trillion. That number is just for that 1 year. The national debt is the cumulative grand total of every single deficit, plus a few sneaky intergovernmental obligations going all the way back to the Revolutionary War. It's the sum of all your monthly credit card statements. And folks, that number is currently sitting north of $34 trillion. That's 34,000,000,000,000. If you printed that number in dollar bills and stacked them, it would reach the moon and halfway back. Maybe more. Fun fact, the debt actually crossed the $1 trillion mark for the first time in 1981, under President Reagan. It took almost 200 years to hit the first trillion. It took less than 2 decades to hit the next few. The pace is the real killer. Now here's where the dark humour comes in. Who owns this mountain of debt? The popular myth is that it's all China and Japan, and while they hold a significant chunk, around 7% and 6% respectively, as of the latest data, the vast majority, the real monster under the bed, is us. About 70% of the marketable US debt is held by domestic entities, US investors, corporations, state and local governments, and, most importantly, the Federal Reserve and various US government trust funds like Social Security. The debt held by those trust funds is the one that really screws with your head. It's debt the government owes to itself. Imagine you borrowed money from your own retirement account to pay your mortgage. You still owe the money, don't you? When a politician says, "We owe money to the Social Security Trust Fund," what they're really saying is, "We took the surplus payroll taxes, spent the actual cash on other things, and replaced it with an IOU in a fancy ledger." When Social Security needs that money, the government has to raise taxes, cut spending, or, you guessed it, borrow more money, creating a new deficit to pay the old debt. It's the ultimate Ponzi scheme, but it's sanctioned by law. The worst part? Since the early 2000s, the US has only run an annual surplus 4 times. 4 times in over 20 years. Every other year has been a deficit, adding fuel to the debt bonfire. Why? Because deficit spending is the ultimate political cheat code. Imagine you're running a local restaurant. You want to look like the best owner ever, right? So you promise everyone free appetizers, you upgrade all the furniture, and you give all your staff massive raises, all without increasing menu prices. Your customers love you. You get re-elected as the best restaurateur, but the bill for all those freebies? You just put it on the company credit card. That credit card is the national debt. Future owners, your kids, your grandkids, get to deal with the interest payments and the eventual bankruptcy. And that's the true generational theft. It's not just a balance sheet problem, it's a moral hazard problem. It punishes fiscal responsibility and rewards short-term feel-good politics. Every politician, regardless of party, has been complicit in this slow-motion fiscal homicide. They promise massive spending cuts after they leave office. It's the equivalent of saying, "I'll quit smoking starting next Monday." But next Monday never comes. The sheer scale of this is mind-bending. According to the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, the US national debt as a percentage of gross domestic product, GDP, is currently over 120%. That means our total debt is greater than the total value of all the goods and services the US produces in a year. In the private sector, if a company's debt-to-equity ratio was this high, the stock market would have already handed it a coffin. For context, during the peak of World War II, a time of existential crisis where we were literally fighting for survival, the debt-to-GDP ratio peaked around 106%. We are now beyond a World War II footing, and we are not fighting a war against the Axis powers. We're fighting a war against ourselves, primarily waged in the halls of Congress. So the $34 trillion debt isn't just a big number, it's a cancer, and the annual deficit is the chemical compound that ensures it keeps growing, year after year, vote after vote. It's a vicious cycle, and the people paying the ultimate price are the ones who don't even have a vote yet. Your kids and grandkids are already starting their lives 6 figures in the hole before they've earned their first dollar. Sweet dreams, kids. If you've made it this far, you're either an economics student who's been dying to hear someone vent about this, or you're someone who's finally realizing your future is being mortgaged by people who couldn't balance a checkbook. Either way, you get a prize. The prize is knowledge. Smash that like button. It's free, unlike everything the government seems to promise. And let's dive into the next chapter of this fiscal horror story. 2. The interest rate iceberg and the crowding out effect. If the national debt is a colossal iceberg, the interest payments are the deadly part you can't see underwater. This is the mechanism that turns a slow, manageable bleed into a catastrophic economic failure. Think back to your own life. If you have a credit card balance of $10,000 at a 20% interest rate, you're paying $2,000 a year just to stand still. You haven't paid down a single dollar of the principal, but that $2,000 is gone forever. Now, scale that up to the US government, which has to borrow money by issuing treasury bonds, essentially IOUs, and the interest payment problem becomes an absolute terror. For years, the US was lucky. The Federal Reserve kept interest rates historically low, practically giving the government free money. It was like having a credit card at a 0% APR for a decade. Even with a massive $20 trillion debt, the interest payments were relatively small, a manageable few $100 billion a year. It bred complacency. Politicians said, "See, we can borrow forever." But then, inflation reared its ugly head post-2020, and the Fed had to hike rates to slow the economy down. Suddenly, that virtually free credit card jumped to a much higher rate. As old, low-interest debt matures, the Treasury has to refinance it by issuing new debt at these higher interest rates. The bill is coming due, and it's a terrifying number. According to the CBO, annual net interest costs are projected to nearly triple over the next decade. We're not talking about a small bump. We're talking about an exponential curve that is about to eclipse essential government functions. By the year 2028 or 2029, interest payments are projected to become the single largest line item in the entire federal budget, surpassing defense, surpassing Medicare, and certainly surpassing all of our infrastructure, education, and R&D spending combined. This brings us to a foundational economic concept called the crowding out effect. Imagine a limited amount of money or capital available in the financial system for borrowing. When the US Treasury needs to borrow trillions to fund its deficits and refinance its debt, it has to offer high interest rates on its bonds to attract investors. This acts like a massive vacuum cleaner, sucking up all the available capital. What does this do? 1. It raises rates for everyone else. If the US government is willing to pay 5% interest, why would a bank lend to a small business at 4%? They won't. This drives up the cost of capital for private citizens, corporations, and entrepreneurs. Your mortgage rates go up. The cost for a company to build a new factory goes up. This kills private sector investment and slows down GDP growth, the very thing you need to grow your way out of debt. 2. It strangles future growth. That money going to interest payments, hundreds of billions, is money that isn't being spent on building a new bridge, funding cancer, research, or investing in the next generation of American technology. It's purely deadweight. We are literally paying people to hold our old debt instead of investing in the future. It's an economic straitjacket. The analogy here is grim. You're on a small boat with a hole in the bottom, the national debt. For a while, the hole was small, and you had a small bucket, GDP growth, to bail out the water. But the hole is growing, and now you have a giant mandatory cost, interest payments, to pay the boat fixer just to keep their mouth shut, which means you have fewer buckets to bail out the water. Eventually, the weight of the water and the cost of the repairman sinks the ship. This is the hidden crisis of the debt. It's not about the number on a giant clock. It's about the lost opportunities, the stagnant wages, and the lack of infrastructure investment that are silently being sacrificed to service a debt we are unwilling to stop accruing. It's a slow, agonizing suffocation of the American dream, paid for with the cheap, easy money of today. 3. The structural deficit and entitlement programs. Let's talk about the parts of the budget that politicians never want to touch. We've established that the annual deficit is the problem, but what causes the deficit? Is it foreign aid? Is it the Department of Education? Spoiler alert, it's neither of those. It's the two great untouchable third rails of American politics, Social Security and Medicaid. These are the crown jewels of mandatory spending, and they are the core drivers of the structural deficit. Mandatory spending, which also includes interest on the debt, makes up roughly 2/3 of the entire US budget, and it operates on autopilot. By contrast, discretionary spending, which funds everything from the military to national parks, makes up the remaining third, and that's the only part Congress actually votes on every year. It's political theatre. They fight like cornered rats over the small sliver of the budget, while the 2/3 monster continues to feast. Social Security and Medicare were phenomenal programs when they were created. They were the ultimate safety net. But the math, the cold, brutal, unsentimental math, has been broken for decades. Here's the simple reality, rooted in demographics: the baby boomers. When Social Security was launched in the 1930s, there were approximately 42 workers paying in for every one person receiving benefits. That was a sustainable model. By the 1950s, it was still a healthy 16-to-1 ratio. Today, thanks to lower birth rates and longer lifespans, we're down to a grim 2.8-to-1 ratio. This means less than 3 people are paying the taxes that fund one person's retirement. That ratio is projected to drop even lower. The Social Security system, contrary to popular belief, is not a giant savings account with your name on it. It's a pay-as-you-go system. The payroll taxes you pay today go directly to pay the benefits of current retirees. As the boomers retire in droves and people live longer, the system pays out dramatically more than it takes in. The Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be fully exhausted, meaning it can only pay reduced benefits, sometime around 2034. Medicare is arguably worse. Healthcare costs in the US explode at a rate far exceeding inflation. And again, the aging population means more people are using more expensive services for longer periods. The Medicare Hospital Insurance Trust Fund is projected to run out of money even sooner than Social Security, potentially by 2031. This isn't a partisan issue. This is a math test that both Republicans and Democrats have consistently failed to show up for. Why? Because the solutions are political suicide. Raise the retirement age, tell a 55-year-old construction worker he has to work 2 more years than his dad did. Good luck. Raise the payroll tax, tell every working American they get to keep less of their paycheck. Riots in the streets. Cut benefits, tell a senior citizen relying on that check that they're getting 20% less. You lose every election for the next 50 years. So what do? They kick the can down the road. They pass budget after budget that adds to the debt, knowing full well they are essentially stealing from future generations to appease current voters. This isn't governing, it's legislative cowardice. It's why the debt is structural, baked into the system, and why the time bomb keeps ticking louder and louder. I want to know what you think. If you had to pick one, raise the payroll tax, cut benefits, or raise the retirement age to fix Social Security right now, which one would it be? Drop your solution in the comments below, and let's see how politically difficult this really is. And hey, while you're down there, hit that subscribe button because we have 2 more chapters of economic doom that you won't want to miss. 4. The doom loop and the death of the dollar. So, we have a massive debt, rising interest rates, and a structural deficit that can't be fixed without political suicide. This brings us to the economic event horizon, the sovereign debt spiral, or as economists affectionately call it, the doom loop. Here is how the doom loop plays out in real time. Imagine it's October 2028. You wake up to the news that the US Treasury auction, where the government sells its debt to the world, has failed. What does that mean? It means nobody wanted to buy our bonds. China is out, Japan is selling, Saudi Arabia is buying gold instead. To get anyone to buy the debt, the Treasury has to jack up interest rates to 8% or 10%. Suddenly, the interest payments on the national debt shoot up by another $500 billion overnight. To pay that new bill, the government has to print more money or borrow more debt, which causes inflation to spike, which forces interest rates even higher, which makes the debt even harder to pay. Round and round we go. The snake eats its tail until there is nothing left. This triggers the ultimate nightmare, the loss of reserve currency status. Right now, the US has a superpower called exorbitant privilege. Because the world runs on dollars, we can print money to buy BMWs from Germany, electronics from Korea, and oil from Saudi Arabia, and they have to take our paper. If the dollar loses that status, if the world decides the full faith and credit of the United States is a bad joke, that privilege evaporates. You're standing in a grocery store in 2031. The dollar is no longer the global standard. The price of imported coffee hasn't gone up by 5%. It has gone up by 300% because the exchange rate collapsed. Your iPhone 22 costs $5,000. Gas is $15 a gallon because oil is now priced in a basket of currencies that doesn't include the dollar. The standard of living in America collapses to match our actual production, not our credit limit. We become, effectively, a developing nation with a Gucci belt. 5. Historical precedents, ghosts of empires past. Now, I hear the skeptics. But we're America. We're too big to fail. This has never happened to us. To you, I say, Rome. In the 3rd century, the Roman Empire faced a similar crisis. They had massive military spending and a welfare state to keep the citizens happy, bread and circuses. When they couldn't pay their bills, they didn't have a central bank to click a button. Instead, they literally debased the currency. They took the silver denarius coin and started mixing it with cheap copper. Eventually, the coin was 95% copper and only 5% silver. The result? Hyperinflation. Soldiers demanded higher pay to fight. Trade collapsed because nobody trusted the money. The empire crumbled not just from barbarian invasions, but because their economic engine seized up. Or let's look at the Weimar Republic in 1923. Germany had massive war debts. They tried to print their way out. It worked until it didn't. There are stories of people ordering a cup of coffee for 5,000 marks, and by the time they finished drinking it, the price had risen to 8,000 marks. People burned money for heat because it was cheaper than buying wood. But that's ancient history, you say. Okay, look at Argentina, look at Lebanon, look at Venezuela. These were once wealthy, prosperous nations. Argentina was one of the richest countries in the world in the early 1900s. Bad fiscal policy is the great equalizer. It doesn't care about your aircraft carriers or your cultural influence. If you violate the laws of mathematics long enough, the math eventually breaks you. The United States is currently walking the exact same path. High debt, political polarization preventing a fix, and a reliance on money printing to cover the gaps. We are not immune. We are just the biggest domino. 6. The menu of misery. Is there a way out? So how do we fix this? Is there a magic wand? No. There is only a menu of misery. The government has 3 options, and they are all going to hurt you. Option A, hard default. The government literally walks out to the podium and says, "Hey everyone, we're not paying you back, sorry." The result? Global financial Armageddon. Every bank holding treasury bonds goes bust. Pension funds vanish. The stock market goes to zero. It's Mad Max within 48 hours. Likelihood? Near zero. No politician wants to be the guy who ended capitalism. Option B, austerity, the eat your veggies approach. We cut spending massively. We slash the military by 50%. We cut social security checks in half. We eliminate entire government departments. We raise taxes on everyone, rich, poor, and middle class, to 50%. The result? A massive, grinding depression, 25% unemployment, riots in the streets. But eventually the books balance, likelihood low. Remember, politicians want to get re-elected. Telling grandma she has to eat cat food is not a winning slogan. Option C. Financial repression and inflation, the hidden tax. This is the one they will pick. This is the one they are already picking. Financial repression is a fancy term for rigging the game. The government forces banks and pension funds to buy their debt. They implement yield curve control, where the Federal Reserve prints money to buy bonds and keep interest rates artificially low, even if inflation is high. Here is the plan. They will let inflation run hot, maybe 4%, 5% or 6% a year, for a decade. Why? Because inflation destroys debt. If you owe $34 trillion, but you devalue the dollar by 50% over 10 years, the real value of that debt is cut in half. The catch? It destroys your savings, it destroys your wages, it transfers wealth from savers, you, to debtors, the government. It is a slow-motion default that happens at the grocery store and the gas station, so they can blame greedy corporations or supply chains instead of taking the blame themselves. They aren't going to tell you they're defaulting, they're just going to make your money worth nothing. That is the soft landing, and you are the airbag. Which poison would you pick? Would you rather have a massive depression today to fix the system for your kids, austerity? Or would you rather suffer through a decade of high inflation to slowly burn off the debt, financial repression? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious if anyone is brave enough to choose austerity. 7. The lifeboat strategy. Protecting yourself from the blast. Okay, take a deep breath. We've covered the horror story. The debt is massive, the politicians are paralysed, and the likely outcome is a decade of inflation that eats away at your purchasing power. I know what you're thinking. This is depressing. Should I just go live in a bunker? No, panic is not a strategy. Preparation is. You cannot stop the US government from printing money. You cannot stop Congress from spending trillions. But you can build your own personal seawall to protect your family from the rising tide. If the game is rigged towards inflation, you have to position yourself on the side of the trade that benefits from it, or at least survives it. Here is what financial survivors do when the currency is being debased. Own real assets. In a high inflation world, paper money is trash. Hard assets are king. This means things that cannot be printed. Real estate, farmland, commodities, gold, and yes, for many, Bitcoin. These assets tend to reprice higher as the dollar loses value. Leverage fixed-rate debt. This is the one-time debt is your friend. If you have a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage at 3% or 4% and inflation hits 6%, the bank is technically paying you to borrow that money. You are paying back the loan with cheaper debased dollars. It's the same trick the government is using. Use it yourself. Invest in yourself, the ultimate hedge. The one thing they can't tax, inflate, or confiscate is your ability to solve problems. In a chaotic economy, income generation is more important than asset appreciation. Learn a skill that is in demand regardless of what the S&P 500 is doing. Whether it's coding, plumbing, or content creation, your human capital is the only asset that truly adjusts for inflation instantly. The American economic time bomb is ticking. We don't know exactly when it goes off, maybe 2030, maybe next Tuesday. But the math is undeniable. The era of easy money is over. The era of consequences has begun. The government has a plan to save itself. Make sure you have a plan to save yourself. If this video scared you, good, it should. But let it be the fuel that drives you to get educated, get prepared, and get serious about your financial future. We're going to be tracking this story closely on this channel, covering every Fed meeting, every budget battle, and every market signal you need to know. We do the research so you don't have to doom scroll the news all day. If you want to understand how the Federal Reserve actually prints money, it's not how you think. Check out the video right here on our channel. I'm historical financial historian, and I'll see you in the next one. Don't let the debt bite.